Briahna seems to have gotten into a little scuffle about free speech with Democrat-turned-independent candidate RFK Jr. Briahna, I'm just shocked to hear that you're feuding with someone on Twitter. It's really new behavior for you.
I wouldn't call it feuded, actually. He did seem to suggest he was open to further dialogue on this, so hopefully that happens. But for background, I called out RFK Jr., who has been a self-proclaimed champion of free speech, for tweeting in favor of sanctioning college students for their pro-Palestine speech and using threats to their post-grad employment opportunities as a cudgel to silence them. Now, RFK Jr. responded saying, "I support the freedom to express all protected speech. I encourage respectful discussions from all sides of the Gaza crisis. I don't support bullying, harassment, intimidation, and discrimination that has inspired fear in Jewish students and caused some to stop wearing yarmulkes on campus. The First Amendment does not protect such conduct on campus. Administration should crack down on it. I look forward to talking in person."
Well, the Libertarian Party also joined the fray, saying in a tweet, "We at the Libertarian Party support all speech, not just protected speech, whatever that means. Who decides what's protected and what isn't? Who decides what constitutes bullying, harassment, intimidation, and discrimination? Same government that locked us in our homes for months? No, thank you. Bobby, you're falling into the exact same trap that was used by your opponents in an attempt to silence you. Hopefully the overwhelming backlash that your reply has sparked will get you to rethink this terrible position you have taken." It's a pretty strong statement from the Libertarian Party, which in the past has applauded a lot of what RFK Jr. has had to say on lockdowns and COVID and other topics, although has been critical of him from the get-go on some of his really unlimited support for Israel. The Libertarian Party, many libertarians, myself included, just kind of oppose foreign aid as a general principle.
So to be clear, what we're talking about here is RFK Jr., he retweeted a tweet from Bill Ackerman. Now, Bill Ackerman's tweet is very long. He's the CEO of Pershing Square. He did one of these kind of essay format tweets that's very, very, very long. He talks about what he feels like is Harvard University's institutional failures to protect Jewish students. His own daughter graduated in 2020, and interestingly, in this screed, he says he asked her, "What was anti-Semitism like on campus when you were there?" And she said, "Non-existent." However, to him, that is evidence of an emerging crisis, not of a status quo of safety that I certainly experienced during my time there for Jewish students. I never heard any concerns or complaints along those lines. But if you get way, way down to the bottom of Bill Ackerman's post, he talks not just about what he thinks are generalized concerns at Harvard, which was fair and not necessarily implicating any free speech rights, but what he thinks needs to be done to Harvard students as a consequence. And this is where we get into the argument that I'm making that now RFK Jr., perhaps he didn't read to the bottom, but that he is tacitly endorsing this kind of behavior. So Bill Ackerman writes, "Because Harvard students are notoriously focused on their job and career prospects post-graduation, disciplinary actions by the administration for failure to meet the university's standards for appropriate conduct that become a part of the student's permanent record should serve as an effective deterrent to overt anti-Semitic acts on campus. No law firm, corporation, or graduate program will hire or admit an anti-Semitic or racist student, et cetera, et cetera." So he is endorsing in a way that Vivek Ramaswamy did not endorse the idea of using career threats, et cetera, as a cudgel to kids down the line. Now, you might say, well, if they're legitimately anti-Semitic, then why do we care? Another problem with this article, this essay that Bill Ackerman posted, is that it's just him characterizing things as anti-Semitic, many of which specific instances have been disproven. For example, there was this argument that pro-Palestinian protesters were getting physical and like pushing away Israeli pro-Israel protesters. The reality was that there was a lie-in, like a die-in, that pro-Palestine protesters had done at Harvard Business School, that then Israeli pro-Israel counter-protesters had come and started stepping over people and disturbing the people lying on the ground. And then the HBS pro-Palestinian students used like sheets so that they didn't come into contact with them as a protest technique to nonviolently try to usher them away from the folks that were lying on the ground trying to conduct a protest. So those kind of events were cited as evidence of anti-Semitism, as well as a subjective view, and I'm sensitive to this, people subjectively feeling unsafe, feeling like they don't want to wear their yarmulke or otherwise display that they're Jewish. I'm sorry that they feel that way, but is their subjective feeling a reason why we should have policies that punish students, especially when the definitions of anti-Semitism, as we've seen, have been so subjective?
Sure. I agree that, he says, RFK Jr. says bullying, harassment, intimidation, bad. Yeah, I think those things are bad.
And it's already campus policy.
Whether they violate the First Amendment is another matter, and that's where unsurprisingly, since I am a member of the LP, we got to be really careful. The Supreme Court has drawn very clear lines, and a whole lot of speech is protected. It has to really rise to a level of threats of violence, specific plans for violence before the speech becomes unprotected. Now, certainly, if Harvard can also implement policies that are somewhat probably not necessarily First Amendment compliant. If there's, I guess this would violate, is just defacement. Like if students are going around and, spray painting Nazi swastikas on Jewish students' dorms, their campus should do something about that, and it should investigate and discipline the people
You should be expelled for doing that. You should be expelled.
I don't think anyone's saying otherwise.
Yeah.
Right. So I will note that nobody is making an accusation of that kind. I think it's perfectly fine if you want to characterize, if you want to take the view that the kind of activism you're seeing from the pro-Palestinian side is anti-Semitic, you have the free speech right to make that claim. You just have to be a participant in that. You can have your protest that says they're anti-Semites. They can have their protest that says you're genocidal. Like, that's what the college campus is. It's where heated rhetoric is taking place and political organizing, and that's the way it's supposed to be. And there's no safety and protection for that. If it goes beyond that to people are being violently threatened, or they're facing violence, or they're facing property defacement, or they're facing harassment of the nature that they're not allowed to speak, where you have an event where where a Jewish person or a Palestinian person is supposed to speak, and then the event gets canceled because people turned off the lights or disrupted it. You can't do that either. So there are very clear rules. There's actually nothing to argue about because these rules have been adjudicated over and over again. Those of us who pay a lot of attention to the campus speech issues know, there's an advocacy organization, FIRE, that swoops in if it gets violated and explains to the university why they can't do X and they have to do Y. So I've been down this road. We've been down this road so many times. There's not a lot of new to debate over what's allowed and what's not. A lot of speech and behavior that might make you uncomfortable is in fact allowed, and we got to be super against giving license to authorities, or especially the government, to sanction more of it. They don't have that authority. Yeah. They lack that authority.
And in fact, what's interesting when you get to this Bill Ackerman stuff, there's a lot of stuff that I think that supporters of RFK Jr. wouldn't co-sign, and so that it is curious that RFK Jr. himself co-signed it. He argues that the Harvard Office of DEI basically is not sufficiently broad, big, or inclusive.
That's a red flag there.
He says that it does not specifically support Jewish or Asian or non-LGBT students. That feels made up.
DEI bureaucracies are, you're not a fan of them either. These are the most notoriously anti-speech organizations there are. The more bureaucrats you have in the DEI field, the more you're going to get legitimate violations of students' speech rights on all sides. You're going to get,
right. So the way Bill Ackerman gets to DEI doesn't cover Jewish people is that this is the quote from the DEI statement. We actively seek and welcome people of color, women, persons with disabilities, people who identify as LGBTQIA, and those who are at the intersections of those identities from across the spectrum of disciplines and methods to join us. There's been a lot of debates about this over the last 2 years, cutting in both directions, but didn't Whoopi Goldberg just get in trouble for saying that Jewish people weren't people of color? Do you remember that? Not a year ago?
Well.
So, I don't know.
If you want to say to me
and Asian people aren't people of color now, I don't know. It's just a bizarre statement.
DEI people do, come from the progressive side, and, criticism of Israel is obviously a big progressive issue. So I'm open to believing that there could be a blind spot in the DEI apparatus, but the entire DEI apparatus needs to be dismantled.
I'm asking the specific question. From that sentence, Bill Ackerman has derived the idea that DEI excludes Jewish people and Asians somehow from the experience. going on.
There's a lot of discrimination against Asians on college campuses that has not been dealt with by. I mean, Harvard has a DEI branch,
right,
and
can we just stick to the point here is that this man is reading a very inclusive sentence and going out of his way. It shows the bad faith of the narrator here when you start to dig into it. Moreover, Harvard did launch an anti-Semitism task force in the wake of all of the protests and things that have been happening since October 7th. And his complaint about that is that not enough people knew about it. So they did something, but because, I don't know, maybe there's not that much community need for it, people weren't talking about it enough, his daughter maybe hadn't heard of it, and that's what he's basing this on. He said that it wasn't big enough, it needs to be publicized more. I mean, the whole thing, and when I say this has to be at least like a 2,000 word Twitter post. It reeks of the kind of grievance politics that so many conservatives for so long said were the problem on college campuses. It was all about snowflakes and the, what was the name of the something mind? The liberal, the Jonathan Haidt book.
Coddling of the American Mind.
The Coddling of the American Mind.
Yeah.
That was the whole focus of kind of the anti-woke, snowflakey crusade. And now the argument here is that RFK Jr. again co-signed is my daughter, who graduated in 2020, who says she never experienced anti-Semitism on campus, who said it was non-existent, is for some that background somehow is leading me to say that Harvard needs to ratchet up its DEI practices and crack down on the employment opportunities of students after they graduate.
I'm totally against that. But we can, when we call out this kind of hypocrisy, you can also show the other case, right? Like many liberals on campuses, a majority of them in multiple polls I've covered and written about and seen, said that free speech does not mean hate speech, and if you feel subjectively offended by speech, then the authorities have the obligation, the campus authorities, the bureaucrats have the obligation to make you feel comfortable and affirmed, have an obligation to make you feel affirmed everywhere you go, every day of your life. And that was a really silly set of norms to try to get enshrined. I don't know about that.
All I know, I'm a little long on the tooth now, but I attended Harvard for 7 years in total. And I never once asked to be affirmed or felt affirmed, and nor was it the expectation of me or any other my other black friends or students of color that the university was ever going to come and weigh in on our behalf. I graduated the year that Larry Summers made those comments about women in science as a woman in science, and we all just trudged through and got our diplomas and kept it pushing.
Well, no, but he got sacked over that. That's a famous example of someone getting cancel cultured, right?
Sure, I'm talking about the experience of students on campus.
Right, I'm saying their experience was corrected by that. That was the action they wanted, right?
So in this letter that Bill Ackerman wrote, he says, I was incredibly saddened to say that Harvard has also become a place where Jewish students are concerned about the threat of physical violence, which is likely has a corresponding impact on their mental health, while among other insults, they are forced to sit next to classmates who openly and comfortably post under their actual names anti-Semitic statements and imagery on the student-wide Slack message system with no consequences for their actions. Again, no citations for what this anti-Semitism is. It's likely saying free Palestine. Now, in response to that, I said, I remember I sat next to a student who believed and argued forcefully in a property law class that stores should have the right to exclude black patrons if they didn't look right, if they just didn't have the right vibe. I sat next to a student who said that white people should be compensated by the government for lost housing value when black people move next door because of racism. Housing properties go down, and so white people should be compensated for it. That was in a poverty law class I took. And I went to school with Stephanie Grace, who very famously made headlines when she argued that blacks are intellectually inferior. She went on to a very prestigious clerkship on the Ninth Circuit and has been living a lovely life, I hear, since then. The black students, when that happened, not a single one of us called for her to face any employment consequences or be punished in any way. All we wanted was some of the black faculty members to sit with us and help us craft some statements and basically come to our defense. And that is the environment, that has been the status quo at these institutions. So it is really interesting to see all of these people come running and screaming about snowflakes. Well, my experience is that we weren't snowflakes, that we were made of sterner stuff and put up with a lot of stuff. Maybe it was stuff we shouldn't have put up with. But the idea that these were liberal bastions that were catering to our every need, hey, maybe that's what they became after 2011, but that wasn't my experience in college or law school.
Okay, but I've read, I don't think these demands characterize most students, but I mean, Briahna, we've seen over and over again the shutting downs of your Charles. I went to University of Michigan event to cover Charles Murray speaking. The students, the event couldn't proceed. They turned off all the lights. They shut him down. That kind of thing happened to Heather McDonald and Christina Hoff Sommers and Milo. Remember that whole stuff? I mean, there was an endless parade of conservatives trying to speak on campus. Students, angry activist students, saying this is hate speech and can't be allowed to continue.
Robby,
We're made uncomfortable
I really
by it.
hear you. But I do feel like you keep straying away from this question of someone here is complaining that their student has to sit next to in a class. Not whether people protest a speaker. That's a different conversation that I'm happy to have at another time. But this is a conversation about RFK Jr. signing on to Bill Ackerman's statement in which he says his kids shouldn't have to sit next to someone in class with a different political opinion as
obviously.
them. And that is dangerous. That is absolutely not what college is supposed to be about.
No disagreement.
Yeah. All right, stick around. We're rising after this.